going to be a little vague here because I really am not a drama person. And that is not the point of this video. But a couple of my viewers / members have mentioned to me that there is somebody out there saying something along the lines of that I think that I am a writing guru. And I'm just that's all I'm going to say about it, because I don't want the video to be about that. Mainly just that concept that someone took away from my videos, that I was trying to pose myself as like a writing guru, kind of lined up with some of the other conversations I've been having lately. So I thought it might be worth its own video. And I don't even know if the person watches my videos. It might just be like vibes based on thumbnails, which if you know anything about YouTube, thumbnails are not always the best representation of what a channel is actually going to be, because the way to get views on YouTube is usually to kind of drama up your topics beyond what they actually are. Whatever nuanced take you have, you're going to think, how can I distill this down to something that people are going to get up in arms about or vehemently agree with, or, you know, pose a real question or whatever. You got to come up with something like that, or your channel just kind of stays in the abyss. So yeah, I don't know if this person actually has even watched any of my videos, but if you do watch my videos, then you know one of the things I say all the time is don't take my advice unless it resonates with you. Don't take any advice unless it resonates with you. There really is no one way to be a writer or to be an artist in general. You have to figure out your own process. And so I can tell you what works for me. I can tell you general things that I know work for a lot of people. I can tell you things that have worked for friends of mine, but we are all wildly different. There is no one thing. And in fact, even on some of my channels about finances, I've urged people to not listen to like one financial guru. Like, don't have one person you listen to about anything. There should always be a wide range of opinions so that you can just get a sense of different processes that different people use and make your own judgment from there. And I think that most writers and artists do understand that of course you're not going to sit there and like follow the template of like Stephen King's career to the letter. I mean, that would be silly. You're going to have to come up with your own process, and you're going to write your own books and create your own things. But for sure, there is also kind of in this social media landscape, there is definitely like kind of a whole industry of sorts. I mean, industry might be a strong word because I don't think very many people are making huge money on this, but there's probably a few that are doing okay. There's definitely a lot of advice people out there. When I was first studying the craft of writing, it wasn't like this. I had to go to the library. I had to see what books they had on writing. I could go to Borders, rest in peace, and see what books they had on writing. And beyond that, I just had to talk to my writing friends, and we were all kind of amateur at this point. So, you know, there were some blogs I could look at from a few writers and message boards, stuff like that. I remember very early on getting on a message board and finding out that Patricia C. Reed was a member. And I was like, I've read her books and she's just hanging out on a bulletin board. How could this famous person be here? But generally you didn't really get a lot of knowledge from people that you knew or much less admired. Nowadays we've got everything from Brandon Sanderson's YouTube channel to a bunch of people who are just working on their first books and are unpublished but are sharing what they're learning along the way. You might develop parasocial relationships with some people who are giving out advice. So I wanted to talk about the very concept of the advice influencer and the parasocial relationship and how to best get advice without taking anything too much to heart and maintaining your own path. Before I get into that specifically, though, I also wanted to note that while I don't think that you should follow too closely the advice of any one author, no matter how much you admire them or like them, I would also note that there is the opposite trap you can fall into of thinking, well, you know, so-and-so is giving all this advice, but I don't think their advice is very good. That's not how I would write a book. And like, in fact, when I finally finish my book, it's going to be so much better than so-and-so author, whether they're famous or not. That's kind of the other side of the advice trap, is in listening to advice and immediately thinking this advice is total crap. That's not how anybody should be doing it. And in fact, this author would be better if they didn't do this. And I most frequently see this leveled against commercial, very famous authors like, A Court of Thorns and Roses would be so much better if Sarah J. Maas would write like this and this and this, and this is how I'm going to write. But there are different styles for different people, and there are different types of books for different people, and there is, just as there is no one advice that's going to necessarily be right for you, and you have to find your own, there's also no advice that might not resonate with somebody else, even though it doesn't resonate with you. And the same goes for works of art that you might think they'd be better if the author did so-and-so, but inevitably somebody else would think that they were worse if they did that. So it's best not to just get too caught up in all of that. Just keep your eyes on your own work and your own process and finding your own voice and your own way of working on it. So who do we have out here in the author tube, author talk, author advice landscape? Well, first, of course, we have amateur writers who are sharing their journey along the way to putting out their first books. They're often very good at social media. That's why they're there. And they're sharing their journey. They might be hoping to set up a certain level of a fan base before they publish. And they also might just enjoy talking about it, maybe connecting with other authors. And you may have strong opinions about this category of people, especially if they do give anything that sounds like advice, because you may think they're amateurs. They don't know what they're talking about. They haven't actually done anything yet. You may have less respect for the beginning author, which is reasonable when it comes to learning about like the craft and the industry. Of course, years of experience do count for something. On the flip side, you may accord them more respect than they deserve simply because you've developed a parasocial relationship with them. You too are a beginning author, and you've decided that they're the person that you're going to trust to be just ahead of you on the path. You're going to do all the things that they're doing and hope that they work for you too. And I'm going to disagree a little bit with both these paths. Obviously, every beginning writer has their own journey, and if you follow too closely to someone else's journey, that might not be what works for you. On the other hand, just because someone's not published doesn't necessarily mean that they don't have some good advice, both in the sense that they may just have wisdom in other areas of life that pertain to their writing. They might be talented naturally at their writing. They might have been working on it forever, and they might actually have some things they're really good at already when it comes to writing. And also, when they do enter the world of publishing, they are going to be very fresh at understanding what's going on there. Whereas someone like me who's been in the industry in some way or other for like 20 years. Well, I'm a little old and out of touch in some ways. That when I first got into traditional publishing, it was one way, and I tend to assume it's the same way, and I have to keeping up with it as best I can to know how it's changed. And indie publishing, when I entered that, it was like 10 years ago. So that's changed a lot. I'm struggling sometimes with like marketing or knowing what's hot, because like you have to keep adapting, and it's exhausting. And you just kind of tend to naturally, so they're human, get stuck on the things that you learned initially. So sometimes I don't think that my advice is always the freshest advice, because I've been in it so long, and I tend to default to things that I already know that might actually be out of date, might not quite be true anymore. Doesn't mean that my experience doesn't have some value, but also the beginning author might know some things that I'm like, oh my gosh, is that how it is now? I had no idea. Probably the biggest thing to be wary of with these kind of influencers is falling into the trap of thinking that they're more successful or that they know more than they do. Like, I've seen some advice about like the publishing industry, whether traditional or indie, on certain YouTube channels or TikToks or whatever, that I'm just like, that is not true. It's just not true. Like the other day, I just saw somebody say that a novel has to be 80,000 words, which is just not true. That's one of many examples I could tell you. Then you have the category of agents, editors, like industry people. They're not writers. They are the people who would be acquiring your book or editing your book or representing you, stuff like that. They've had experience on the business side of publishing. When you are first getting serious about becoming a published writer or a successful indie writer, particularly somebody who is selling, either you're being acquired by editors, you're being repped by agents, or you're putting out indie books and they are selling. Like, your goal is to this is kind of a career goal for you. Then I do think that the industry people often do have some of the best advice for that early stage, because they're going to tell you from the perspective of what is selling, and they know all the common mistakes that pop up over and over and over again on so many manuscripts. They see even more manuscripts than I will ever see in a lifetime. They've already seen. Every writer has some stupid mistakes they make in the beginning that we are just blind to when we start, that we need to listen to somebody who's seen it a million times, who can kind of reality check us and go, actually, everybody does this, and here's why it doesn't work. Here's why it's actually pretty annoying when you've read 20 manuscripts in a row that are all doing the same thing. So that's the kind of advice that you can get from those kinds of writing advice influencers. And they're also going to tell you just kind of the overused tropes that they see all the time, the common story beats that they know work because they've seen so many manuscripts that do work and so many that don't. They're going to tell you all that kind of common stuff that is usually good to know in the beginning. And I do feel like everybody should know these common mistakes. But, of course, the other side to this kind of advice is it's going to really steer you into a certain lane of saleable work. And while I think it's important to know what are common mistakes so that if you do break one, you do it very deliberately and in a way that does not fall into a common trap and make you look like you just don't know what you're doing, you also don't want to take this advice as gospel. At some point you'll be kind of trapped there in this very formulaic space where you're not really doing anything great. You're just doing things that are good. And if you really want to produce something that's great, sometimes you're going to have to break that advice, probably. And also to know that you shouldn't be afraid to necessarily break that advice. The main point is that you need to know why the advice exists, not necessarily that you should always follow it. But when you're kind of in that beginner to early professional stage, you can kind of take these things very seriously and feel nervous about breaking them. And at some point you have to kind of let some of that structure go away and try some different things that feel a little more oh my gosh, I don't know if this is going to work, but this is what's really calling me. And this is the story that's just more me, more weird, more creative, whatever it is. Sometimes you got to let it go. And then you have authors that have more experience, in which case you also have two tiers of those authors. You have people like me who are definitely mid-listers. You didn't know who I am before you started watching my videos, I'm sure, at least most of you didn't. And then you have the Brandon Sanderson channel and, the writing advice books written by people that you've heard of. You have Stephen King's On Writing. You have essays by Ursula K. Le Guin. You have that sort of thing. And the vast majority of authors out there are mid-listers, people that you won't have heard of. If you go to a writing course at your local writing conference or whatever, you probably are who is this person? But hey, look, they do have some published books when I look in their bio. And in fact, there are some mid-listers that have had moments where they've done very well. I'm going to lump everybody in this tier of who, for the most part, that there are very few people who have become icons of their genre. Those are the ones that are you might be tempted to really listen hard to them because they're so well known and you might have been reading them for so long or respected them so much, or they might have been the reason you decided to write even. The mid-listers, probably not so much with that, but they may have had some huge high points in their career where they had a very successful book, but it just didn't really stick in the popular consciousness. Disheveled editing, Lydia here. I just want to clarify that, of course, mid-listers can also have huge mega fans. It's just that the mid-listers are more likely to be the authors that you're always saying, oh my gosh, has anyone read this book? You may not have heard of it, but it's so amazing. rather than, your Brandon Sandersons and your Stephen Kings. If you're recommending those, it's not much of a revelation to anyone. So these authors have some authority, some real experience. So you might trust them more than the beginning author, and that is not undeserved, but each path is so individual. Your path is not going to look like mine. And sometimes those of us in this tier can accidentally kind of spread misinformation, even if we didn't mean to, simply because we are more trusted and we might say something about our personal experience and people will start to think, oh, so that's how it is. Whereas there's usually more than one way that things can unfold. So there's a theme here. There's always more than one way to get there in the publishing industry or in any creative industry. And the big authors, they are not on social media as much usually. Brandon Sanderson's probably kind of one of the biggest exceptions because he does have a lot of stuff on his YouTube channel, and that's kind of rare. I also know some successful authors who have made courses. That way they can just make the course once to answer every person who has ever asked them to share their method and process, and then just like, okay, now you can download my course. Big authors usually don't offer editorial services, where the Midlist authors may do that as a side job. But with all of these published authors, I also just the main thing I want everyone to bear in mind is that fame does not always equal the level of wisdom that's going to resonate with you. Both the editor agent category and the Midlist author category, I sometimes see people bring up something along the lines of, the those who can't teach quote, implying that if any of us start to make it a part of our business model to talk about writing, that we must not be very good at what we're doing. But I have always kind of hated that quote because teaching is really a very separate skill from producing, and some people are just much better at teaching than they are at the actual writing. And honestly, I don't even know that that's true of me or not. All I know is that I have always really enjoyed this part of the writing journey. I've always really liked answering questions and helping other novice writers doing critiques. At one point I did a little mentorship with a 12-year-old boy. It was a bunch of published authors where we matched up with middle school kids and shared writing and kind of gave them some tips and stuff. And all of those kind of side things when it came to talking to high school kids or helping my fellow writers figure out their manuscripts, I just enjoy that part of it. So that was one thing that led me to start this channel. But don't get me wrong, I like the writing way better. Even so, and if my writing really blew up independently of this channel and was making all my money for me, you probably wouldn't see that much of me because the writing is still my favorite part. But sometimes you feel a calling at different times in life to do different things. I feel like I should clarify for anyone who's newish here or a sporadic viewer that I was making my living as a writer for years, and I chose to walk away from it. But what I mean by if I was making all my money writing, I wouldn't be doing this, is that if I was making all my money as a writer, writing the things I really want to write and not writing to market, which is kind of still fun, but also a lot more like a job, and was something I realized that I just didn't want to keep up with for the rest of my career because it sucks all your energy away to actually write the things that you like. Whereas YouTube is kind of a different skill set, so it still leaves me with time to write the things I love, whether they make money or not. I have seen a lot of writers speak, some of them more famous than others, some of them fairly famous, others I had no idea who they were. And out of everyone I've ever seen, the one that stood out to me the most was Kathleen Dewey. Kathleen Dewey was just such a delight of a woman, and her writing advice was just really sharp and really good. She was a delight to listen to when it came to how to give critiques, how to edit, how to come up with ideas. Her speeches were just really compelling, and I got a lot of good inspiration and takeaway from them. And then I read her book, and I hate to say this, but I did not really like her book at all. It's just the worst when that happens because I loved her as a person so much that I wanted to like her book so bad, but it just wasn't my kind of book. And that is a good example of how sometimes the authors that you respect the most as writers don't have the best writing advice. And sometimes authors that you don't really like have the best writing advice. There's not a lot of correlation there in fame or how much you like them versus how good their advice actually is. So it is still entirely possible that after all of this, you might have actually gotten the best advice from one of those beginning authors who is chronicling their journey on YouTube and is taking 2 years to write their first book and is going nowhere. But they might have a really great insight about writing. You just never know where the good advice is going to come from. But the one thing that is absolutely true is that you're going to have to figure out your own path, and nobody's path is going to be a template for your own journey as a writer. I have another video coming up about writing advice, common writing advice that I don't want you to follow or that I personally don't like, which is kind of a good follow-up to this video. So stay tuned for that one. If you're new here, my name is Lydia Foxglove, and I'm a fantasy author. On this channel, I talk about the creative life in general and the writing life in particular, both the craft side and also the financial, the emotional, all aspects of the writing life, and sometimes reading too. If you'd like more from me and you'd like to support the channel, the books I always recommend are my Hidden Land series, which are the books of my heart, my fantasy world I've been working on for ages, and you can find the link to those in the description along with all the other books I've written. If you'd like more from me, I have a membership where you get 2 bonus videos per month voted on by you guys, and you get access to my Discord server where we chat about writing and other random stuff every day. It's only $5, and if you're cheap, you can just join for 1 month, watch all the videos, and leave. I understand, but I extremely appreciate those of you who have stuck around for a while, and you can access that through Patreon, Substack, and YouTube memberships. And if you'd like to catch my lives, I post every Sunday at 3 p.m. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye! You're allowed to watch this cute movie of Capelia as long as you don't judge how much my rug needs to be vacuumed, and the couch too, for that matter.